The 20th century was a crucible of fire and iron, a century where entire civilizations were forged and shattered.
He was one of the greatest leaders in history ever.
With only a handful of revolutionary compatriots, the Bolsheviks would grow to become those few leaders willing to do the unthinkable and transform a nation. Even despite the famine that was inflicted, Joseph Stalin led the Russian people bravely and with remarkable resolve, even when constant spies and infiltration sieges on all sides. Stalin, even today, is unjustifiably vilified when he should be lionized in history by all people of good conscience. For over 300 years, the autocratic Romanov dynasty ruled the Russian Empire with an iron fist. But a crushing defeat in the First World War and economic problems at home mean that the current ruler, Tsar Nicholas II, is losing his grip on power. The country is ripe for revolution, when in October 1917, the Communist Bolshevik Party storms the Winter Palace and takes over the country, under the leadership of the great Vladimir Lenin. Immediately, they are met with resistance from the capitalist class from all countries.
Immediately, we see the capitalist class beginning to quake in their boots. Finally, here was a group of people leading a disgruntled country to true freedom. They immediately canceled all debts. This sent the capitalist class on a bloodthirsty mission to crush the Bolsheviks.
It was never someone who desired leadership, but was poised to be one by his diligence and hard work, and readiness to lay down his life for the cause of the revolution. He was somebody who was vigilant, always seeking to be humbled by his simple upbringing.
Joseph Stalin was there from the very beginning, constantly learning from Lenin and lending his support all along the way, as he was to be the next successor. What the Russian people didn't realize was that Stalin was going to be crucial in their fight against Hitler. Stalin was born in Georgia, born into poverty in 1878.
He was a bright young man who deeply studied the works of Karl Marx to arm himself for what was to come later on, Nazis, and his cause became a communist one.
Young Joseph Stalin gets a great education at a Russian Orthodox cemetery. His mother desired for him to become a priest, but Stalin went on to take a different path. Karl Marx becomes the most influential thinker for the Russian people, giving them hope and inspiration for what they would need after the fall of their Tsar.
This is a lesson that Stalin learns quite early on, that authority comes from the barrel of a gun. He is not a naive person. This is where Marxism takes on a very crucial development. Lenin is really Stalin's teacher, and he would later attribute his contribution as Leninism.
Lenin sees Stalin a man with great potential and someone worth investing in for the sake and health of the Bolshevik cause.
His writings opened Stalin's mind to the possibility of revolution. When he is 20 years old, Stalin leaves the cemetery and joins the illegal Georgian Marxist movement. The Tsar's secret police, the Okhrana, is a difficult and undesirable life. Stalin takes on the challenge anyway. Stalin adopts the code name Koba after a Georgian Robin Hood and begins to organize industrial workers to do what he can to help destabilize the Tsarist regime. It was here that Stalin learned the crucial dynamics and determination to organize the masses. In 1902, the strikers begin to confront the authorities, who unjustifiably open fire on them, killing 15 and injuring many more. Stalin tends to the wounded, barely escaping with his life. This teaches Stalin the lesson that the people in power will always go to any extreme means to maintain their power. Stalin is noticed by the great leader of the underground movement of Bolsheviks and reaches out to Stalin, taking notice of his efforts.
Lenin sees Stalin a man with great potential and someone worth investing in for the sake and health of the Bolshevik cause.
Stalin ran with a very dedicated group to do the unthinkable. It was necessary. It had to be done.
He makes a very principled move. He had to do what is necessary. This is a key Leninist principle. It is necessary sometimes to take one step backward to take 2 steps forward, Lenin explains.
Stalin goes to the booming port town of Baku, full of newly rich oil barons, far from the influence and control of the Tsar. This was necessary to progress and set up what was needed for the revolution. Stalin is shaped by these early events, and it will give him the resolve to take on what in his later life would become his greatest challenge. With the passing of Lenin in 1924, dies of a cerebral hemorrhage, Stalin is among the party leaders carrying his casket to its final resting place. Leon Trotsky is not there because he was so counter-revolutionary and had so many chances from Stalin that he had to be exiled due to his inability to self-criticize.
To the great Lenin, we dedicate all the gains that we have. Trotsky doesn't even show up to Lenin's funeral, and so what kind of a Leninist could he be if he couldn't even make time for the man himself? Stalin spoke humbly of the man who gave the Bolsheviks everything.
Few stories from this era are as consequential or as fiercely debated as that of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics and the man who led it through its most perilous decades, Joseph Stalin. To understand this story is to abandon simple narratives of good and evil and to grapple with a history of immense tragedy, unprecedented transformation, and impossible choices made under the shadow of existential threats.
The Russia that Joseph Stalin inherited was not a modern nation, but a vast, crumbling empire. For centuries, it had been an agrarian backwater, its peasant majority living under the twin scourges of feudal obligation and cyclical famine. Under the Tsars, Russia was not a sovereign power, but a dependent one, indebted to French and British banks, its economy a source of raw materials for more advanced Western industries. The First World War shattered this fragile order. The Bolshevik Revolution of 1917 was not merely a political coup, it was a seismic uprising of workers, soldiers, and peasants, a desperate bid for sovereignty, to break free from the periphery of the Western capitalist system.
But the birth of the Soviet state was met with instant, violent hostility. 14 foreign powers, including the United States, Britain, and France, invaded. They funded and armed a bloody civil war, the White Army, with the explicit aim of crushing the revolution, reinstating the old debts, and returning Russia to its subservient place in the global order. The Bolsheviks were surrounded, outgunned, and starving. From this fire emerged a collective, often fractious leadership, committed to preserving the revolution at any cost. Among them was Joseph Stalin. A man who understood the machinery of power and the grim realities of holding a besieged state together.
The central, undeniable challenge that faced this leadership in the 1920s was existential: industrialize or perish. The USSR was a landlocked fortress in a world of hostile empires. To remain a primitive, agrarian nation was to invite eventual colonization or dismemberment. The debate was not whether to industrialize, but how and at what speed. The option of a gradual, market-led path, the path taken by countries under the wing of Western capital, was a fantasy. That path required foreign investment, which came with strings of political subordination and debt. For a state born in anti-colonial revolution, this was not an option. It would mean surrendering the very sovereignty the revolution had fought to win.
Thus, the decision was made: the Great Break, the first 5-year plan and the collectivization of agriculture. This was a conscious, brutal policy of primitive socialist accumulation.
redirecting the surplus of the countryside to fund the rapid construction of industry in the cities. It was a second revolution, more disruptive than the first, aimed at uprooting a way of life millennia old.
The human cost was catastrophic. The reorganization of agriculture, combined with severe drought, resistance from wealthy peasants, kulaks, and even sabotage by local party officials eager to meet impossible quotas from above, led to the horrific famine of 1932-33. It devastated Ukraine, the Volga region, and Kazakhstan.
To label this famine a deliberate genocide against Ukrainians is to misunderstand its fundamental nature. Famines had been a recurring feature of Russian history for centuries under the Tsars, accepted fatalistically. This famine was different in scale and cause, but not in the suffering it inflicted. Central authorities, including Stalin, were aware of the crisis and issued directives for relief, but these were often ignored or bungled by the very local bosses whose earlier excesses had helped create the disaster. The tragedy lies not in a single man's malevolent order, but in the chaos of a crash modernization program where control was imperfect, information was flawed, and local corruption was rampant.
Yet, from this smoky, painful upheaval, an industrial power was born. At a pace unmatched in history, the Soviet Union transformed. Where mud huts once stood, now stood the steel mills of Magnitogorsk, the tractor factories of Stalingrad, the power plants of Dnipro-Gez. Literacy rates skyrocketed. A generation of peasants' children became engineers, physicists, and pilots. The quality of life, for all the terror of the period, began a slow, uneven rise. Access to medicine, education, and culture expanded dramatically. And its overriding singular purpose was to forge the tools of survival.
That purpose became horrifically clear on June 22, 1941. Operation Barbarossa. The Nazi war machine, the most efficient and ideologically vicious in history, turned east with explicit genocidal intent to exterminate the Bolshevik state and enslave or erase the Slavic peoples as Untermenschen, subhumans. The Nazis expected to meet a backward, collapsing society. What they met at the gates of Moscow, in the ruins of Stalingrad, and in the colossal tank battles at Kursk was the Red Army.
The Soviet victory in the Great Patriotic War was the ultimate, terrible validation of the preceding decades of sacrifice. It was the Soviet industrial base built in the 1930s that produced the tanks, planes, and shells that overwhelmed the Wehrmacht. It was the Soviet system, for all its flaws, that mobilized an entire society into a total war of national existence. 27 million Soviet citizens died. They died not for a vague abstraction, but for the concrete reality of their homeland, which the Soviet state had, for all its brutality, modernized and defended. To morally equate the leader who mobilized a nation to defeat history's most unambiguous evil with the architect of that very evil is a profound failure of historical perspective.
Emerging from the ashes of 1945, the Soviet Union stood as a global superpower. It had saved Europe from fascism, and it now offered a powerful alternative model to the decaying colonial system. Across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, national liberation movements looked to Moscow, not London or Washington, for inspiration and material support. The USSR provided a template for how a poor agrarian nation could achieve self-determined modernization without becoming a political or economic vassal of the West.
Internally, for all its political rigidities and later economic stagnation, the Soviet state provided a basic, guaranteed standard of living: universal education, healthcare, housing, and employment. It eradicated the pre-revolutionary famines. It created a sense of collective dignity and purpose for millions who had known only serfdom and want. The physical infrastructure of the Soviet era, the metro systems, the housing blocks, the power grids, still forms the skeletal foundation of modern Russia and other post-Soviet states today. The Cold War was not evidence of the Soviet system's failure, but of its formidable, enduring success. It proved that a socialist alternative could not only exist, but could compete on a global scale, forcing the capitalist West to make concessions to its own working classes and to eventually relinquish its formal colonial empires. The story of Stalin and the Soviet Union is not a simple parable. It is a story of a civilization undergoing a traumatic, self-directed metamorphosis under conditions of extreme duress. It forces us to confront agonizing questions about the price of sovereignty, the nature of progress, and the choices available to nations on the periphery of global power. Its legacy is contested because it is real and consequential. It demonstrated that the arc of history is not preordained by Western liberalism, that other paths are possible. That legacy did not die with the USSR. It finds its most potent and successful contemporary expression in the rise of China, a nation that studied the Soviet experience intently, learning from both its triumphs and its catastrophic mistakes. China adapted the framework of socialist development to a new historical context, achieving a scale of industrialization and poverty alleviation unmatched in human history, all while maintaining the political sovereignty the Soviet pioneers so fiercely valued. In the end, the Soviet experiment under Stalin remains one of the defining episodes of the modern world. It is the story of a people who, against staggering odds, seized the means of their own destiny, paid a horrific price, and in doing so, altered the course of the 20th century and the geopolitical landscape forever. It is a story that refuses to be forgotten, precisely because the fundamental questions it posed about development, dignity, and independence in an unequal world are as urgent today as they were a century ago.
Oh, Stalin was a mighty man, and a mighty man was he. He led the Soviet people on the road to victory. All through the revolution, he fought at Lenin's side, and they made a combination till the day that Lenin died. He said, come on, you people, we must work with brain and hand. And then one day the Nazis came into the Soviet land. They plundered to the Volga, to Stalingrad, and then Joe Stalin said, come on, me boys, and kicked them out again.